Welcome back to Top 5.
Five counts of murder in the first degree. How do you plead?
Guilty.
Anderson Aldrich, born Nicholas Franklin Brink on May 20, 2000, in San Diego, California, came into the world already marked by a troubled family dynamic. His parents, Laura Vopel and Aaron Brink, separated shortly after his birth, beginning a tumultuous childhood that would see Aldrich ricochet between instability, isolation, and eventual radicalization. His father, Aaron Brink, was a former mixed martial artist and pornographic actor who struggled with drug addiction and frequent legal troubles, spending much of Aldrich's childhood absent. His mother, Laura Vopel, had her own struggles with substance abuse and mental health, leading to multiple arrests and run-ins with the law. The dysfunctional nature of his home life left young Nicholas in the care of his maternal grandparents for extended periods. Nicholas' maternal grandfather, Randy Vopel, was a far-right Republican politician in California, serving as a member of the state assembly and representing viewpoints that aligned with ultra-conservative ideologies. Randy's political beliefs, which often bordered on extremist, likely had a significant influence on Aldrich's early understanding of the world. Although his grandfather held positions of power, the household was far from stable. Aldrich's exposure to his grandfather's views, combined with his emotionally chaotic home environment, laid the groundwork for the extremist mindset that would later shape his actions. Growing up, Aldrich faced a number of challenges that exacerbated his isolation. He was a target of bullying from a young age, particularly during his middle school years. His peers often taunted him for his weight, awkward demeanor, and what they perceived as strange behavior. In addition to physical bullying, Aldrich endured homophobic slurs from classmates who mocked his perceived sexuality. These relentless attacks deepened his sense of alienation and resentment, pushing him further from any semblance of a normal childhood. Rather than finding solace in supportive relationships, Aldrich turned inward, developing a deep hatred for those who tormented him and, eventually, entire groups of people. As Aldrich entered his teenage years, the internet became a primary refuge for him. Online, he found communities where his feelings of anger and resentment were validated. Aldrich was drawn to extremist forums that celebrated white supremacy, neo-Nazi ideology, and anti-LGBTQ rhetoric. These online spaces became both an echo chamber and a source of radicalization. Here, Aldrich found a sense of belonging he lacked in real life, as well as a place where his hateful views were not only accepted but encouraged. The constant consumption of violent, extremist content began to shape his worldview, transforming his personal grievances into a belief that he was part of a broader movement against degenerates and enemies of the white race. By 2016, at the age of 16, Aldrich legally changed his name to Anderson Aldrich, likely in an attempt to sever ties with his father and the Brink name. This act, while seemingly minor, signified a turning point in Aldrich's life. He was not only rejecting his personal identity but also fully embracing the dark ideologies he had been absorbing online. He delved deeper into white supremacist and neo-Nazi groups, actively participating in forums where members fantasized about committing violent acts against minorities, including LGBTQ people, Jews, and people of color. Aldrich's online activity became increasingly concerning, as he began to view himself as a soldier in a larger war to protect the so-called purity of the white race. Despite his growing radicalization, Aldrich's personal life continued to spiral out of control. His relationship with his mother remained fraught, with frequent arguments and violent outbursts. Laura Vopel's own battles with addiction and her numerous arrests left Aldrich without a stable parental figure, forcing him to rely on his grandparents, who, while loving, were unable to curb his deepening involvement in hate groups. The dysfunction within his family likely fueled his rage, as he blamed others for his lot in life, viewing himself as a victim of both familial neglect and societal decay. Aldrich's descent into violence became more pronounced in 2021. That summer, tensions between Aldrich and his grandparents reached a boiling point when they informed him of their plans to move to Florida. Feeling abandoned and betrayed, Aldrich responded by holding them hostage in their home, threatening to kill them and blow up the house. When police arrived, Aldrich refused to surrender, leading to a standoff with a SWAT team. During the search of his home, law enforcement discovered that Aldrich had been stockpiling weapons and explosive devices. He had clearly been preparing for a larger act of violence, yet despite the severity of the situation, the charges against him were later dropped, and the case was dismissed the following year. This failure of the legal system to intervene allowed Aldrich to continue planning his eventual attack. Following this incident, Aldrich became even more determined to commit an act of domestic terrorism. He began meticulously plotting an attack on the LGBTQ community, whom he viewed as a major threat to the moral fabric of society. Aldrich purchased an AR-15 style rifle and began practicing with rainbow-colored targets, symbolizing his intent to kill LGBTQ individuals. His hatred toward this community was not simply a personal vendetta but a reflection of his adherence to the neo-Nazi and white supremacist ideology that demonized LGBTQ people as agents of societal decay. Aldrich saw himself as a soldier fighting a war for the preservation of his race and values, with the LGBTQ community squarely in his crosshairs. On the night of November 19, 2022, Aldrich drove to Club Q, a popular LGBTQ nightclub in Colorado Springs, Colorado. Armed with his AR-15 and dressed in body armor, he walked through the front doors and immediately began firing indiscriminately at patrons. The club was packed with people attending a dance party, and for the first few moments, many thought the gunfire was part of the music. Aldrich moved methodically, shooting anyone in his path without hesitation. 2 people were killed instantly at the entrance, and chaos erupted as clubgoers scrambled for cover. Screams echoed through the nightclub as bullets sprayed across the dance floor, striking people who were trying to hide under tables, behind the bar, or in other parts of the club. Aldrich killed 5 people that night: Daniel Aston, a well-loved bartender and performer; Kelly Loving, a transgender woman who had just arrived at the club; Raymond Green Vance, who was attending the event with his girlfriend; Ashley Paw, a mother there to support a friend; and Derek Rump, another bartender who had been trying to help others escape. 19 others were injured in the attack, many of them critically. Aldrich's rampage continued for less than a minute before a group of brave patrons intervened, stopping what could have been a far deadlier massacre. Richard Fierro, a U.S. Army veteran attending the event with his family, charged at Aldrich, tackling him to the ground. As they wrestled for control of the rifle, another patron, Thomas James, who had already been shot, joined the fight, helping to disarm Aldrich. Dree Norman, a transgender woman in the club, then used her high heels to stomp on Aldrich's head repeatedly until he was incapacitated. Together, they prevented further bloodshed, holding Aldrich down until police arrived and took him into custody. The courage and quick action of these patrons undoubtedly saved countless lives that night. Aldrich was taken to a hospital for treatment due to the injuries sustained during the altercation before being booked into jail. The investigation into the attack revealed a treasure trove of evidence pointing to Aldrich's deep-seated hatred for the LGBTQ community. His online activities showed years of involvement in neo-Nazi forums, where he had openly discussed committing violent acts. The use of rainbow-colored targets during his shooting practice and his frequent use of homophobic slurs only reinforced that the attack was a premeditated hate crime, driven by extremist beliefs. In the days following the shooting, Aldrich's defense attorneys claimed that their client identified as non-binary, using they/them pronouns. This assertion was met with widespread skepticism, as many saw it as a disingenuous attempt to deflect attention from the hate crime charges. While Aldrich's legal team continued to push this narrative, the overwhelming evidence of his violent hatred toward the LGBTQ community made it clear that his actions were motivated by bigotry and extremism. On June 26, 2023, Aldrich pleaded guilty to 5 counts of first-degree murder and 46 counts of attempted murder, receiving 5 consecutive life sentences without the possibility of parole, as well as an additional 2,211 years for the attempted murders and other charges. The severity of his sentence reflected the enormity of his crime, ensuring that Aldrich would spend the rest of his life behind bars. However, the wounds left by the attack would linger far beyond the courtroom. In January 2024, Aldrich faced federal charges of committing a hate crime, adding another layer to his already lengthy prison sentence. The federal indictment solidified what many had known from the start, that Aldrich's attack was not an isolated act of violence but part of a broader wave of domestic terrorism fueled by hate and bigotry. His name became synonymous with the ongoing threat of extremism in the United States, particularly the rise of white supremacy and anti-LGBTQ sentiment. The survivors of the Club Q shooting, as well as the families of the victims, struggled to rebuild their lives in the aftermath. The trauma of that night would never fully disappear, but the resilience of the LGBTQ community in Colorado Springs remained strong. Club Q reopened its doors, determined to continue being a safe space for love, acceptance, and community. The bravery of those who fought back against Aldrich, including Richard Fierro, Thomas James, and Dree Norman, was celebrated, and they were hailed as heroes who had stopped a greater tragedy from unfolding. Aldrich's story, from a troubled childhood to a radicalized young man, serves as a haunting reminder of the dangers of hate and extremism left unchecked. His life, shaped by neglect, violence, and hatred, ended in infamy, but the legacy of the lives lost at Club Q remains a beacon of love and strength in the face of unimaginable tragedy.